Welcome to the Take Action broadcast, separating fact from fiction.
Hello, Dr. Sam Dubé here once again, and it is my great honor to have a very special guest with us today. He is the former Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, that being from 1979 to 1989. He is the last surviving architect of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is incredibly relevant for what's going on today being Friday, September 3rd, 2021. I would like to welcome officially the Honorable Brian Peckford. Thank you, sir, for joining me here today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Brian, as one of the creators of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, what is going on today must really, really concern you. Can you give us your thoughts on the situation today and how the Charter is relevant?
I'm extremely saddened by the course of events that have happened over the last 2 years, the actions by provincial governments and the federal government as it relates to enacting measures that clearly violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. When we sat down over 17 months to patriate the Constitution and add the Charter of Rights to it, I don't think anybody thought at that time that it was possible for a government or governments of this country to do anything that would infringe upon these rights and freedoms. And here we are today with governments right across the nation enacting through various public health acts and other so-called emergency legislation provisions which infringe upon freedom of assembly, freedom of association, security of the person, all of which are detailed in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And the one option that a lot of the governments think they have to get around the Charter of Rights is that section number 1, which says, Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. In other words, there may be situations in the future where governments are going to have to take some certain actions which may infringe upon what we said below. However, in order for them to do that, they have to demonstrably justify what it is they're proposing to do. None of the governments in Canada, federal government, or any of the provinces have even made an attempt to justify what they're doing because, frankly speaking, they know that the data is not on their side. The science is definitely not on their side. It's been demonstrated in study after study after study, from masks to PCR tests to you name it. And with it, like in British Columbia, where I am 99.9% recovery rate on this so-called virus. So the governments are clearly violating the Constitution. And unfortunately, in our legal process, it takes so long to get through the procedures of the provincial trial court, provincial appeal court, onto the Supreme Court of Canada, that all of these things can be done and harm can be done. People can die because they can't get into their surgery, which was slated, which got canceled. And all these things that can happen before any judgment is rendered about the constitutionality of what they're doing. If we had a province which had any intestinal fortitude, they would do a reference themselves, which would go directly to their appeal court and then could get into the Supreme Court quicker. That's one way that it could be done faster. But because all the provinces have capitulated into this fear-mongering, into this false narrative, then we have no way of expediting that court process. When we crafted the Charter of Rights and did the patriation in 81, 82, it was clear to most people at that time, but overall the court was quite legitimate, both at the appeal courts in the provinces and at the Supreme Court of Canada. For example, and this is a really good example, Trudeau's own friends turned him down when he tried to unilaterally patriate the Constitution and not go through the provinces. He got turned down by his own friends.
Right.
They told him, sorry, my friend Pierre Elliott Trudeau, you cannot do this constitutionally. Sorry, you got to go back and negotiate with the provinces. you must have a majority of provinces on side to make these massive changes, which will affect them in the provinces and their jurisdiction. Okay.
Right.
So there was a good example of it. Since then, there is no question, both through our school systems, through our universities, through a lot of the business people in this country, there's been a gradual degradation of the ethical standards by which we operate as a society, as a people, as Homo sapiens on this planet. And I think it also applies to the justice system, unfortunately. And we've seen some examples of that already at a lower court as it relates to certain constitutional provisions of these lockdowns and the like. And so I think it's a legitimate question to ask now, just how honest and how legitimate are the courts of this country? I just keep hoping, on hope that the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, which is doing the same thing as Rocco Galati is doing and doing yeoman work, fantastic work, that as they get through the system, the judges will begin to see that they've got to really look at the data here and not just take what the governments are feeding them. There's a lawyer in Alberta who was on a meeting call with us last week who said, guess what I'm doing? And everybody said, what are you doing? She said, I'm taking the courts to task because they are in a conflict of interest situation because they've already brought in all the lockdown measures in their court. So they're not legitimate. She said, I'm going to your court and I'm going to look you straight in the eye and say, you cannot hear this case. Because all around me, I see all of the elements of the policies that are anti-constitutional that you have already adopted. So you're in a conflict of interest. You've already gone with the false narrative. So you're not legitimate. And quite likely that's true of the Supreme Court of Canada too. And so how legitimate is it if in fact they've already succumbed to all these provisions which are blatantly unconstitutional? And the other problem is that there are very few originalists around anymore, except in the United States. There are still a significant number, like Ted Cruz and so on. But there are very few Senator Ted Cruzes around in Canada. And therefore, what they're doing is what Beverly McLaughlin brought in when she was Chief Justice, this growing tree concept, right? That the law keeps changing and changing. There's nothing basic anymore. There's nothing fundamental anymore. And I disagree with that point of view altogether. I think there are certain fundamentals, like we're now talking about in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. If you're going to interfere with my right of assembly, you have to justify it publicly before you put it into law. And they haven't done that. So I think we're at in Western society, at a real turning point here. Democracy has always been a minority governance system on the planet. It's never been a majority governance system. Right. So we're always in a rearguard action. So it seems to me, through the Industrial Revolution and the subsequent revolutions of technology and so on that have occurred, mankind has wrapped itself in a cloak of some kind of thing of being spoiled, for want of a better word, and we're living off what other people have created for us, and we don't fully recognize, as the young people don't recognize the veterans of the war and how hard it was to fight for freedom and all that kind of stuff. So as a group, as a society, we're failing, and things are starting to rot because we don't really appreciate the nature of democracy and what it takes, right? And it's a very fragile thing from day one, right? What was it Churchill said? Until something else comes along better, this is what we got. So I think that's where we are right now. And unless there was a significant number of people around who recognize and understand history, the democracies of the Western world are likely to fail. I think it was Freedom House who does, the level of freedom in the world. 17 years in a row now, democracy is less than the previous year before. 17 years in a row, democracy has been failing and losing its grip. And so the chances of Canada and the United States and poor old Western Europe, which always seems to be in a trap of its own making, the question now is whether, in fact, we can survive as some kind of a democratic system. And I think this pandemic has accelerated the problems that we've had in our society and are getting exacerbated. Now we know what the leaders will do when they're under pressure. They're going to capitulate and amass more power instead of disseminating their power and consulting widely with the people, even with the parliaments, even with their own parliaments, they're not even consulting, let alone with the people directly. The other thing is, we've allowed, instead of people being advisors and then the policymakers taking that advice plus other advice. I used to do this all the time. I threw people out of the room, almost physically. I have your recommendation, you can go now. It is a recommendation, you understand. This is from a deputy minister or assistant deputy minister or somebody in the executive council and so on. Suddenly they started to feel their oats. Well, I quite quickly told them who was boss here and that I make the final decisions with cabinet, considering all the factors, not just yours.
Right.
Yours is only one of many. And what we've done is we've allowed the unelected, the bureaucracy to dominate public policy in this country.
But you talking about unelected dominating policy.
The people are up talking. They should not be talking at all. I wrote a blog the other day about here in British Columbia. Please stop talking about Dr. Bonnie Henry. It's Premier Horgan and Minister Dix. They're the ones who are accountable to us. Dr. Henry is accountable to the minister. And in the terms of reference of her job, it says advise, recommend, advise. So you should take your advice from her and then go to cabinet and make a decision. And then you announce it, Premier Horgan, you announce it, Minister Dix, you announce it, Premier Ford, and leave them out of the TV cameras altogether. Okay. Policymakers are the ones who are supposed to announce, explain, and those are the politicians who we elected because they're accountable to us. Bonnie Henry is not accountable to us. So this, we got the notion of what a democracy is all twisted up because the bureaucracy started to dominate because you know what? We elected a lot of people who were very insecure. I found it in my cabinet all the time. And I would say to the minister, I'm sorry, when you go back to your department, you sit down with your deputy minister and your assistant deputy ministers, you let them know who's boss to start with, and you will love to hear from them to give you advice. Thank you very much. And then you take that and bring it to cabinet and whatever. Okay, that's gone. That's gone. Not only are these people formally educated, all of these bureaucrats, the other part of the equation that everybody forgets is that they're as confident as hell. And they go into a room with a minister who's completely without confidence and they just walk all over him or her. I've seen it 1,000 times.
This what happened with Premier Doug Ford passing the buck to the Chief Medical Officer of Health regarding the vaccine passports?
Exactly.
Because we just had the announcement enacting vaccine passports September 22nd in Ontario. Quebec did it September the 1st, 2 days ago.
Yeah. Ford is a really good example. He stands out because he is extremely insecure. You can see it all over him in his mannerisms and so on when he comes out on the stage, completely insecure, right? And Minister Dix and Horgan here have a little more confidence, but because this is such a huge issue, they, whenever they can, they'll put her, Bonnie Henry, forward first. Or only, some days it's only her talking. She has no authority whatsoever to talk. None whatsoever. She is an advisor, unelected.
Okay, we have an impending election September the 20th. Trudeau's calling it. He's our prime minister right now. He wants a majority government for the Liberals. I mean, listen to his speech. Oh, sure, you can choose not to be vaccinated, but boy, oh boy, you're not going to be allowed to take public transportation via air and train because we won't allow the unvaccinated to put the vaccinated at risk. Wow, that makes a lot of sense because if the vaccines actually worked, the vaccinated wouldn't be at risk in the first place. I can go on and on about that. But how is it that he feels he can circumvent or just blatantly ignore the charter?
Yeah, absolutely. And even most of the established parties go along with what he's saying to some degree or another. Aaron O'Toole and the leader of the NDP all go along with this business of fighting the charter, as do most of the premiers. So we got to get rid of Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole and the head of the NDP, plus all the premiers in this country. We're really going to make changes. So when you come to the election, I have completely sort of come full circle. So I've opted out of all of the major parties completely. And I was always part of one of the three major parties. I'm not a part of any of them now. I've joined the People's Party of Canada, and I'm campaigning for them because I think we've got to start from scratch. Look, I knew Justin Trudeau's father. We fought like crazy over the offshore oil and gas. We fought for crazy over hydro, fought for crazy over the fisheries. And he always was a centrist, born and bred. So is his son. They're centralizing people to amass more and more power. And Justin is just like that. And they don't have too much problem with not telling the truth. They love the fudge and to be not at the center of truth, but out on the fringes where sometimes it's not really consistent with good ethics. And of course, we found he broke the law 5 times. The ethics commissioners found that. An independent ethics commissioner has found the prime minister of our country has violated the law 5 times. It's all in writing. You can go in on the ethics commissioner site and found it. That's who our prime minister is. So he has got to go. There's no question. There is a big upswing now in Canada to get rid of him. Unfortunately, what we're replacing him with right now, if the polls are accurate, is a blue tie rather than a red tie. Very little else changed. The suit is the same, the shirt is the same, the pants are the same, the shoes are the same. There's very little difference. That's a sad reality. We have now recognized that Trudeau must go. We haven't recognized that in doing that, we're being really strategic and smart to get rid of him because he's gone too far. But what we're replacing with is almost exactly the same thing. So my view of the world at 79 years old and a former premier of this country, and involved in the Constitution that we're now allegedly living under when we're not, is if I can do anything to contribute to the country now in these years, it's to look to reforming it completely. That's the best message that I can provide as one Canadian who has been there and done that.
Okay, Brian, I got to say, though, we know that you cannot be unvaccinated. Okay. And this is a huge issue right now. You're talking about a timeline of a decade in order to revamp all the political parties in the entire government. We can't wait that long. What do we do in the meantime? And are the notices of liability reasonable to file with employers and colleges and universities and such?
Yeah, I think you got to do all that kind of stuff, file all those notices of liability. All of these notices have to be given so that we're covered when it gets to the courts. The problem is, with these parties in place, all of which more or less support some form of coercion, some form of violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and so on, it looks quite dismal.
So all of them except the PPC, right? No, I interviewed Max months ago, and their platform is very clear on their website. I would encourage viewers to check out the website. They're against lockdown. There you go. And I mean, this is not a promo for PPC, but when you're talking about who to vote for, this is who we're talking about right now, because they have a true platform that is against the vaccine mandates, against vaccine passports, freedom of choice when it comes to the experimental gene therapy injections. I mean, if the only scientific claim that can be made is that these are therapies that do not prevent transmission or infection, then should it not be a personal choice if all they do is allegedly reduce some of the severity, some of the symptoms?
Israel is proving it now. I mean, Israel is one of the most vaccinated countries in the world, and Sweden just said, we don't want to see anybody from Israel coming here, because now I just read a new article from Swiss Policy Research, which shows, this is data right out of Israel themselves, shows that it's almost equal now between the vaccinated and non-vaccinated getting the new variants. And the other problem with that is we don't know what the vaccine people's future is, because we don't know the medium to long-term effects of it. Whereas the unvaccinated have no injections and therefore have a much better chance of survival. So when you get one of the most vaccinated countries in the world having their people prevented from going to other countries because of the level of infection, well, you know that vaccines are not working. Now where we are, I think one of the problems you got is that when you get in so deep, you can't backtrack.
Right.
And I think a lot of the governments now are beginning to see through the data that they must be reading that, oh my God, we've made a big mistake here. So what are they doing? They're digging in And it's unbelievable the amount of how much I see Fauci out today in a report that I saw. You gotta have at least one booster. I remember him talking about, even if you got one jab, not two, and just wash your hands. The curve will be over with, flatten it in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks, right.
So
right.
all of these people, I mean, the lies and mistruths and misrepresentations that all of these people in high places have done, and the poor ordinary person who doesn't read very much and only listens to CNN or CBC, boy, they're in some dilemma because they don't even know. I mean, we know people, they don't even know anything about a vaccine having any problem at all. And when they think they know, they'll respond to you by saying that's lies. Somebody's putting out lies. Oh, Mr. Trump was putting out lies, even though he's not president anymore.
Yeah.
Somebody somewhere is putting out lies, and all of this is not true, and all the other stuff is true.
I was speaking to Dr. Tess Laurie, who's one of the great evidence synthesizers on the planets and a physician as well. And she said, no, the facts don't matter anymore. They literally look at the science, or they're presented the real science, and they're like, man, doesn't matter or whatever. And so we have to focus, I guess, on the individual rights. So this is why I want to ask you a little bit about the exemption. So, there was talk about how if you go for the exemption, you're kind of like admitting that, okay, I'm trying to get by, but right?
Yeah, I know. Exactly. These exemptions are all wrong to start with, because there should be nothing to be exempt from, right? It shouldn't be there in the first place. That's extremely fundamental. But to come back to my earlier point, when you just said, and other people are saying, and people that I'm talking to every day are saying, that the facts don't matter anymore. That is the sure sign that our civilization and our democratic system is in deep, deep trouble. We have somehow ignored the roots that makes science and reason so important in our daily lives.
When you look at social media doing all that censoring, when you look at mainstream media basically touting this official narrative and ignoring the science, and even twisting and manipulating research and data and quotes, and vilifying legitimate researchers and physicians who are out to help people, how does the charter apply to that?
Freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media communications. So the other media communications covers the social media.
There you go.
Section 2B of the charter. There it is right there. They're violating that every single day. Now, people might also understand that this is not scatterbrain or just happening one and then another picking it up. This is organized. The Trusted News Initiative was signed December 2020. Anybody can go and look it up. Trusted News Initiative. Of course, lovely words, Trusted News Initiative. And CBC, Reuters, AP, ABC, NBC, CBS, all of them are part of this. BBC, all over the world, they signed this declaration which said, we will not carry anything that we deem, non-medical people, that we deem to be misinformation on the pandemic.
So, and the irony is they're non-medical people making this declaration.
Exactly. So that's why you've got all this stuff being taken down, because they're all part of the Trusted News Initiative, December 2020. So it's organized. It's organized. It's deliberate. I think there's a lot of people out there who are afraid. I think sometimes in emails that I've sent back to people and conversations I've had, like you can hear me now, I've been quite straightforward, quite blunt, sometimes even brazen. I used to say years ago to my students when I taught school for a short period of time, be honest, be yourself, but be a little bit brazen. Those were my 3 points I used to make. When I've done that with certain people, and I've stopped them in their tracks with facts and science, and they were smart enough to know they didn't have an answer, they just go quiet. They just go quiet. And a lot of them are afraid to believe. They're afraid to believe that my government would let me down that much. both provincially and federally. I would say there's a good 30 to 40% of the people in Canada today who've now been exposed to enough. The fear-mongering has been so great. They were fearful first. They're still fearful. But now a lot of them know the difference, but will remain silent. They don't want to believe. It's too tough on them.
Brian, you've been in politics forever, and you know how things work in and out. How far will the current government go in order to maintain their position? I mean, we saw what happened in the US, okay?
Yep.
Without being really explicit here, but what can happen to us? We've always required voter ID, right? In person.
Yep. Yep.
But now, and forgive me, I'm not as familiar with the intricacies as you. What can happen here? What should we be prepared for? What should we fear?
I think what we should fear is that the majority in a poll today is still saying they agree with vaccine passports for all these non-essential services. I think we have come down the road so far of groupthink, of eroding the individual for the group, for the collective. Canada is viewed by most people outside its boundaries as being quite socialistic. And the reduction of the individual to the group, I think that's the greatest thing, because as long as that is so, government will help me, government will do it, because we're just about into everything right now. Everybody's in the pot of groupthink, and government do this for everybody. Meanwhile, your individual autonomy, your individual rights, as demonstrated and explained in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, are taken second and third fiddle. So the great danger is that there will not be the significant reawakening to what democracy really means, and the role of the individual, and the role of the community, the role of people through their school boards, through the municipal councils, through the provinces, to the federal government, is that they just leave it all to government, and they just live these quiet little lives with having fewer rights than we ever had since 1867. So I think that's the great danger. And the educational system doesn't help, right? It hinders, because a lot of people in the universities are very left-wing, and therefore left-wing means that the group over the individual, and there's no real balance there anymore. So it seems to me, if you had to pick one idea or one thing that's of greatest danger, is that the majority of people, as they are today, supporting vaccines, will remain that way, and therefore our country is finished as we knew it.
So Canadian democracy is at stake.
No question. And I had a lady the other day, got a small business, and she gets it, right? She gets it. And I said to her, do you really want to continue on campaigning? I have to tell you, you came to this meeting, and I so appreciate it. And you're so good at what you do here for us. But I know you've got all these clients out there in this little city, and that your job, your business may be at stake here because you oppose vaccinations. She said, I've already crossed that Rubicon. I said, how do you mean? She said, my husband and I sat down over the last week and we talked about it. She said, this is a hill we're prepared to die on. We need more of her type saying that now, because they see it, she sees it. If we don't stand up now, the chances of us having our individual liberties are diminished substantially.
So you're saying for the average person then who is dissenting, there's a lot more at stake here than just their job.
So democracy is only viable if the individual remains seized with being involved. Democracy will only survive in Canada if individuals decide that they are a citizen with responsibilities to make this country continue to be a democracy. Therefore, they've got to participate. Therefore, they've got to get involved in organizations and political parties that stand for liberty, that stand for freedom, that stand for individual rights, right, balanced off against the group rights. But if there's an argument over the two, the individual right always supersedes, right? That's the kind of country you want to have, right? And that nation states are important because they have a history and a culture and a geography that no big entity, global entity, could ever have, right? Well, I have a history, an Anglo-Saxon Scottish history. You have a history. We have forged a nation. When you start reducing nations, you're going to have homogeneity. You're not going to have diversity. Diversity will go, divisions will go. And therefore, people don't matter anymore. Where you came from, what your geography, what your culture is, gets lost in the big morass of bureaucracy out of some city in the world. So my message would be, democracy only survives as long as there's active individual participation right down to the community neighborhood level. When people get active, get engaged, then they'll see. This is the point, you see. Not only will they be able to influence policy, but they'll see where the nation is. They'll see where the community is. They'll understand what we're saying theoretically. It will be manifested into a practical reality to them. Oh my God, you mean to tell me the council can go ahead and just do that without our involvement now? On the municipal level or the school board? Oh my God, we got to change that. So that's the beginning then of a process of true democratization by the individual to be an active participant in the community. Right now, municipal councils and provincial governments are just running roughshod over people and their ability to have a significant influence in the policy, even to a zoning change on the corner of my street. And we've got to get more engaged. If we don't, then the present trajectory of our system will continue to fail.
You know, Brian, you've covered the whole spectrum here because you talk about the dissolution of nations due to globalism, and yet the solution is the involvement of the people, individual level. And yet I know, and you know, that so many people are frightened to be involved, or they don't want to be involved because they think they don't matter. When you see protests occurring in Italy or in France and social media suppresses this, you think, well, I'm going to be one of 100,000 people at a protest. I was over at the Civic Hospital on the 1st, and I'll tell you, there were several hundred people there, and the media gave it a passing glance.
I was at the one here in Nanaimo. Same thing. The media gave a passing glance.
And we had police putting on their sirens and putting a thumbs up driving by. OC transport bus drivers honking their horn, putting the thumbs up. Not a peep in the media. So when you have that happen, it's understandable. People are frustrated, saying, "Well, look, I'm going to say something. It doesn't make a difference. I'm going to call my MP. I'm going to call their office. I'm going to leave. How do I know they're getting the damn message, Brian?"
Right. Exactly. Because they'll only get an electronic answer back.
So
I wrote all the premiers and the prime minister about Charles Hough and how he was being treated by the Interior Health Authority of British Columbia, where his patients were being denied medical treatment. He was asking for them to be looked at by another specialist because he was only an MD, and they looked like they had injuries as a result of the vaccine. He didn't know for sure, but he wanted somebody else with more medical expertise to take a look at it. To this day, they have not, and they've maligned him, took away his hospital privileges. I wrote the prime minister and all the premiers outlining this. Not one answer back.
Those rural family physicians, they know everything. They're just unbelievable. They're bionic doctors. Like, seriously, they're just unbelievable. In my own training, I saw some rural family physicians. They could do everything. And so for him to sound the alarm, that should have been a huge red flag right there. And him seeking help from someone more, I wouldn't say more qualified, more specialized, perhaps in vaccine injury and such.
The natural, not only the natural thing, the law, the system in Canada says you then refer them to a person who has more specialized knowledge in the field you think where this ailment should be looked at.
Yes. In fact,
that's what he did.
Yeah, he did. And in fact, Hough, Dr. Hough, Charles, he actually sounded the alarm and proposed a mechanism of injury regarding the spectrum of signs and symptoms we would see for post-vaccination, post-injection, ranging from headache all the way to the clotting that was identifiable on scans. So this is a really big deal. people are frustrated because they feel they can't make a difference. And yet you're saying, you know, the very fabric of democracy is at stake here. We have to involve ourselves.
And they can make a difference if enough of them get out and do it. So that's the thing you got to try to get through to people, that everyone matters. And this is what they're trying to take away from us, that everyone doesn't matter. So if we got to resist this business of not mattering, we do matter. And the more and more people get out to these rallies and take an active participation in the public policy through the election, the better.
Okay, it's so good to hear you say that, Brian. It does lend some hope, because I know so many are feeling hopeless right now. And among the physicians, many physicians are feeling quite hopeless. I mean, when your license, your livelihood, your reputation is on the line and you're being told, even threatened, what do you do? You know, but you have to make a choice, and you're giving us this choice. Brian, I want to leave you with the last word. Anything else? Only thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to expand upon these ideas, because I think they're so important for Canadians to understand. And hopefully I've said something, or I've said something that might trigger somebody to get up off their bottom and get out there and get actively involved, because without it, our democracy will fail.